Today, we're going to break down an incident that almost nobody saw coming, the Marinera incident. It's an incredible story, a rogue oil tanker, a ghost fleet, and a high-stakes chase that literally brought two nuclear superpowers right to the edge of conflict. This was way more than just a chase. It was a game of geopolitical chess, played out in the icy, dangerous waters of the North Atlantic. So let's set the scene. It's January 7th, 2026. You're 300 miles south of Iceland, in the middle of what feels like nowhere. But it's not. This is the North Atlantic, and it's not just any patch of water. It's the GIUK Gap, a hugely strategic choke point between Greenland, Iceland, and the UK. The weather is brutal, the seas are high, and a confrontation that's been building for weeks is about to hit its boiling point.
And then it happens. Before the sun is even up, in those awful sea conditions, you have the best of the best making their move. U.S. Navy SEALs, flown in by the legendary 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. You know them, the Night Stalkers. They are executing this incredibly dangerous boarding of an oil tanker. But this isn't the beginning of the story. This is the explosive end of a chase that has crossed half the planet and is about to light a political firestorm.
All right, so to really get our heads around this whole thing, we're going to tackle it in 5 parts. We'll look at the anatomy of the chase itself, then Russia's terrifying nuclear gamble, the international legal battle that followed, the political explosion back in Washington, and finally, the really weird things it did to global markets. First up, let's break down the chase. This whole thing started as what should have been a pretty standard sanctions check, but man, it escalated fast into something much, much bigger. We're talking about a 17-day pursuit across the Atlantic Ocean. So it all kicks off on December 20th, 2025. Picture this. A U.S. Coast Guard cutter, the Monroe, is in the Caribbean trying to intercept this tanker, the Bella 1. But instead of complying, the Bella 1 pulls a radical U-turn and just bolts for the open Atlantic, and the chase is on. Now, fast forward 11 days. It's New Year's Eve, and they're in the middle of the ocean. The crew does something absolutely wild. They literally get out paint, slap a Russian flag on the hull, and rename the ship Marinera. Then they officially add it to the Russian Maritime Register. They're basically trying to put on a costume of sovereignty mid-flight. But then, January 6th, this is where it goes from a chase to a crisis. Russia deploys a nuclear submarine, the Kazan, to escort the tanker. The game has just completely changed. And that leads to the very next day, January 7th, when the SEALs hit the deck and the 17-day standoff comes to an end. So you're probably asking, what is this ship? Well, the Marinera, formerly the Bella 1, was a classic example of what's known as the Shadow Fleet. Think of it as a ghost navy. It's this huge global network of old, beat-up tankers. Their ownership is a total mystery, they often don't have proper insurance, and they're notorious for just turning off their tracking systems to go dark. Their entire purpose is to move sanctioned oil for countries like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. And this specific ship? It already had a rap sheet. It had been previously sanctioned by the US for being part of a smuggling ring that was funding Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Okay, now for the part of the story where things get really, really serious. The moment this stopped being a law enforcement issue and became a genuine superpower standoff. That was when Russia sent in a nuclear submarine to protect an oil tanker. And the sub they sent wasn't just any boat. No, military intelligence knew exactly what it was. The Kazan. It's a Yasen-M class nuclear-powered attack submarine. To put it simply, this is one of the absolute crown jewels of the Russian Navy. It's the kind of asset that makes planners at the Pentagon lose sleep. So why is this sub so feared? Well, first off, it's capable of launching Zircon hypersonic missiles. We're talking about weapons that travel so fast they're considered a significant threat to even an American aircraft carrier. Second, it has these near-silent propulsion systems. It's a ghost in the water, making it incredibly difficult to track. Just by showing up thousands of miles from home, Russia was sending a very loud message about its global reach. Its presence, just being there, single-handedly transformed this whole thing from a chase into a direct military confrontation, forcing the US and its allies to scramble their own destroyers and sub-hunting planes just to manage the risk. So while you've got this tense military standoff happening in the Atlantic, a totally different kind of battle is kicking off. A war of words and international law fought in press releases and diplomatic cables. Russia's argument was, on the face of it, pretty straightforward. Their Ministry of Transport put out a statement, and I want you to hear this directly. They said, quote, "The actions of the American side violate the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. No state may use force against vessels duly registered in the jurisdictions of other states." End quote. Senior Russian lawmakers were even blunter, calling it, quote, outright piracy. And this is where you see the two sides talking completely past each other. The US position was, this vessel is stateless. They said when the chase started, it was flying a fake flag, it wasn't legally registered anywhere. So international law gives us the right to visit. Plus, we have a federal warrant. Russia's position, totally different. They said, nope, as of December 31st, it's the Marinera, a sovereign Russian ship protected by UN Clause Article 92. And that article basically says a ship on the high seas is only subject to the laws of its own flag state. So in their view, a US warrant means nothing out there, a complete and total clash of legal world. But it wasn't just a US-Russia fight. The UK was providing a lot of support to the American operation, and they framed this very differently. It wasn't about legal technicalities for them. Here's the UK Defense Secretary John Healey speaking to Parliament. Quote, "This is a sanctioned, stateless vessel which carries a long history of nefarious activity and shares close links with both Iran and Russia, part of a Russian-Iranian axis of sanctions evasion." End quote. They were painting this as part of a much bigger shadow war. So you've got the naval standoff, you've got the legal battle.
The vessel is part of an increasing web of shadow shipping that fuels and funds instability across the world, that undermines global trade, and that threatens our national security. We know Russia operates a vast shadow fleet of its own to bankroll its illegal invasion of Ukraine. And last year, it's estimated that Russia sold $100 billion worth of sanctioned oil, money directly funding attacks on Ukrainian citizens, such as the onslaught during Christmas, involving 600 missiles and drones, which killed at least 3 people. We owe it to the Ukrainians to step up action on these shadow operations, and we are.
But back in Washington, D.C., a political firestorm was erupting. Because this one seizure was just the tip of the iceberg of a much larger and deeply controversial U.S. strategy aimed at Venezuela. After getting a classified briefing on the full scope of the plan, Senator Chris Murphy came out and he did not hold back. I'm going to read you exactly what he said. Quote, "This is an insane plan. They are talking about stealing the Venezuelan oil at gunpoint for a period of time undefined as leverage to micromanage the country. I mean, the scope and insanity of that plan is absolutely stunning." And he didn't stop there. He immediately started drawing lines to what he saw as America's biggest foreign policy mistakes. Here he is again, quote, "That sounds like a recipe for disaster. It is just slightly different than the mistakes we made in Iraq and Afghanistan. There, we used our military as a means to try to micromanage the country. They waited us out, and as soon as we left, chaos erupted. Why would it be any different under these circumstances?" End quote. And this wasn't just one senator. The Senate Minority Leader at the time, Chuck Schumer, echoed those same grave concerns. He said, quote, "They're relying on the most unreliable, corrupt people who hate America. So this is fraught with peril. The American people need answers." End quote. So you can feel it, right? Even as the mission at sea was a tactical success, the strategy behind it was being torn apart at home. All right, let's look at the fallout. The ripple effects from this one seizure went way beyond just that one ship. It did some really weird things to global markets and potentially rewrote the rules for how things work on the high seas. So here's where it gets really strange. After the seizure, the price of Brent crude oil, that's the global standard, it didn't go up, it went down by 1.35%. Now think about that. You've got a potential naval shootout between the US and Russia, and oil prices fall? That's not how it's supposed to work. Usually that kind of risk sends prices through the roof. So what on earth was going on? Why would a superpower standoff make oil cheaper? It's a paradox, right? But the answer is that the market wasn't trading on the risk of war. It was trading on the US strategy. Here's how it worked. First, there was already a ton of oil on the market, a supply glut. But second, and this is the key, the US announced its new policy. It was going to seize and then sell about 50 million barrels of this illicit oil from the whole shadow fleet. So the plan was to basically dump all this confiscated cargo back onto the open market, and that created this massive fear of a flood of cheap oil, which pushed prices down and completely swamped the fears of a military clash. And the long-term consequences are huge.
As you've seen today, 2 more ships were seized. We are in the midst right now and in fact about to execute on a deal to take all the oil. They have oil that is stuck in Venezuela. They can't move it because of our quarantine and because it's sanctioned. We are going to take between 30 and 50 million barrels of oil. We're going to sell it in the marketplace at market rates, not at the discounts Venezuela was getting. That money will then be handled in such a way that we will control how it is dispersed in a way that benefits the Venezuelan people, not corruption, not the regime. So we have a lot of leverage to move on the stabilization front.
That GI-UK gap is a Cold War-style hotspot again. For all those ships in the Shadow Fleet, this idea that you can just paint a new flag on the side and be safe, that cloak of sovereignty, is now in real doubt. And you better believe insurance and shipping costs for anyone in that line of work have gone through the roof. But maybe the biggest takeaway is this. The United States just set a precedent that it's willing to use military force to enforce economic sanctions right out on the open ocean. So in the end, the seizure of the Marinera was a clear demonstration of American military reach. It proved that they could and would act, even with a Russian nuclear submarine lurking nearby. But the whole affair leaves us with this really big, unsettling question. Was this a necessary act that establishes a new precedent for maritime law? Or was it a reckless gamble that just kicked open the door to a much more dangerous and unpredictable era of conflict on the world's oceans? That's the question we're left with.